you're listening to us from. I want to welcome you to this first edition of our webinar for the year 2024. And I want to think also, it may not be too far-fetched to wish all of us a happy new year, since this is the first webinar we'll be having this year, and first of many series that we'll be having this year. Once again, you're all welcome. My name is Olusanjo Stephen Fawole, and I'm moderating this session. Right away, we're going to be delving into our topic. This webinar is brought to us by Ubosele and Company, which has been our series since last year. And so today we'll be speaking on the topic, the 2024 budget and the real estate sector implication. And this morning, we have one of our principal partners who will be taking us through this topic. So right away, I want to invite and welcome Mr. Emeka D.L.A. to take over the floor as we begin this webinar. Before he takes over, I'd like to also tell every one of us who are listening and on this call, should you have any question, any contribution, please, while the presentation is going on, use the chat box to drop in your question, and we may be privileged to give one or two persons the opportunity to ask their question live. Thank you for listening and thank you for being here. Mr. Ele, you're welcome, sir. It's good to have you.
Thank you very much, Sanjo. Let me join Sanjo in wishing all of us a very happy new year and a very prosperous 2024. I'd like to also join him to welcome you to this webinar series. This happens to be the first in the year, and I do hope that we'll enjoy the session. The topic, as Sanjo has told us, is 2024 budget and the real estate sector implications. Usually what we try to do is to address topical issues, current topical issues, as the case may be, that affects real estate. I mean, we will all agree that the budget, which was signed into law by the president on the 1st of January, is a very topical issue. So we felt that we should start the year addressing that issue of the budget and its implications for the real estate sector. I mean, which, as we know, the real estate sector, apart from affecting our daily lives in terms of housing and roads and all that, is also a very key engine of growth in the whole economy. And therefore, if the sector is doing well, by and large, the economy will do well. So today we're going to briefly go through this topic, and join me as I share my slides. The budget was signed on the 1st of January. It is termed the budget of renewed hope. I like the word hope because, I mean, this country survives on hope, as the case may be. Everybody tends to just rely on hope for survival because we live in very tough and difficult times. Ours is very peculiar, from poor economy to insecurity to all manner of things that bedevil this country. And therefore, the budget termed budget of renewed hope is very apt because, like I said, the average Nigerian survives on hope. You know, of course, the signing of the budget on the 1st of January is also very laudable because it means that we are continuing a cycle where budget is signed into law at the beginning of the year. There were times when it used to be by February or late January that it would be signed, or even March. But this time around, it was signed on the 1st of January so that implementation can run all through the year. That's a very commendable, very commendable. What are the key priorities of the budget? When I mean key priorities, I mean as declared by the president: defense and internal security, job creation, macroeconomic stability, improved investment environment, human capital development, poverty reduction, and social security. These are the key priority projects. You will notice that the real estate is not there for very obvious reasons, because the country is facing enormous challenges, and I can understand the president picking from the ones that he considers most important to deal with the core issues or the issues that he wants to address. The budget for the whole year, which you can see on the screen, you can see that the budget is total expenditure for the year is 28.7 trillion, actually bigger than the budget for last year. But in real terms, actually lower, because if you factor in exchange rate, the exchange rates for last year and this year, you see that even though this is higher in Naira terms, in dollar terms, it's actually smaller. It's good to bear that in mind. So the total budget for the year, total expenditure budget is 28.7 trillion. Divided into sectors, which we should note because they're very important. I mean, we could see that the current expenditure is about 8.7 trillion. Capital expenditure is about 9.99. Strategic transfer is 1.74. Debt service is about 8.27 trillion. If you look at it in percentage terms, you will see that capital expenditure alone is about 35%. That's remarkable because you also know that there were times when the current expenditure used to be more than capital expenditure. At least this year, capital expenditure is more, following again a cycle that is commendable. Of course, the debt service, as high as it is also slightly lower this year, which is again commendable. So if you indeed factor in the statutory reserves, because part of the expenditure on capital projects will come from there, you will see that the capital budget for the year is actually in the region of about 11 billion, which is commendable. Again, if you look at the revenue profile, which is where we do have a big problem, total expected government revenue is about 18.23 trillion. The breakdown is there with regards to where they will come from, share of oil sales, revenue from government agencies and minerals and all that. But the remarkable thing is that we're expecting a very optimistic projection, as it were, budget of revenue of 18.23 trillion. And we intend to spend about 28.7 trillion. It means that we're going to have to fund a deficit of around 9.18 trillion naira. That is remarkable because we're already in debt, as it were. The debt service is already high. We see that in this year's budget is about 8.27 trillion, which is about 29% of the entire budget. Well, here we are, even with a very optimistic projection of our revenue for the year at 18.23, we still have to borrow at least 9.18 trillion to fund the budget. What are the other indicators for the budget based on the government position? The project inflation to be about 20.1%. It's a lot higher right now. Projected economic growth at 3.88%. If you recall that last year we came to the average of about 2.5%, you see that 3.88 is being optimistic. In fact, the World Bank actually says it will be about 3.1%, but the case is that whether it's 3.1 or 3.88, anything in between that will do, because if you consider where we're coming from in terms of what it was last year. Exchange rate is pegged at about 800 naira to a dollar. Of course, what is happening in the FX market as of now. Oil production is pegged at about 1.78 million barrels per day, while the oil price benchmark is about $7.96 per barrel. As we go along, you will get to know why these are important. So just note them. You come to our own sector, which is the Federal Ministry of Housing and Urban Development. The total allocation to that sector is 99.98 billion. It may sound as a big amount, but then it's not. If you see the breakdown, you see that the capital projects, again commendable, is taking the bulk of the allocation, followed by the overhead costs and personnel costs. And what are their key projects? The key projects of the ministry are construction of 20,000 housing units. I'm sure you know that part of the plan of the president is to build what they call hope cities across the country. So the 20,000 units will just be a part of what will form the basis for that hope cities that will build across the country under this administration. Renewed hope cities all across the country. So they intend to construct additional 20,000 units, for which they budgeted 18.19 billion. Of course, there's also the issue of establishment of local building material clusters in 6 geopolitical zones, upgrading of slums in 24 locations across the country, and completion of ongoing national housing program projects in 35 states. There are quite a couple of them going on. Quite a whole lot of projects going on across the country. A lot of them were started by the last administration, and it is glad to note that this government is continuing with them to ensure that they are completed. and of course, completion of federal secretariat projects in 11 states of the Federation. You know, if we analyze this budget, you will see that the total allocation of 99.9 billion to the Federal Ministry of Housing and Urban Development is like a drop in the ocean considering our housing needs. You know, but however, as low as it may be, because with regard to building a home, no matter how small, you will notice that this amount can go far in providing the number of units that we require in the country. But then if you look at the budget in totality, which I've tried to do, it gives some room for hope. And why do I say so? It's because the expected expenditure of 9.9 trillion on capital projects is commendable. Like I've said earlier on, if you actually add the sum from statutory reserve, you will see that total expenditure on capital projects will actually end up being about 11 trillion. You know, that is quite a lot, and that's commendable. Proposed massive infrastructural works to the tune of about 1.32 billion, cutting across several ministries like works, transport, aviation, and water resources. You know, the idea is that if the government is going to spend this much across these ministries, it definitely, hopefully, will have some impact. Indeed, between the supplementary budget and the 2024 budget, you know that both are running concurrently up to March. The works ministry alone will rehabilitate and construct about 2,254 roads and bridges across the country. Why I'm mentioning this figure is the multiplier effects of these projects across the board if they are indeed implemented. You know, road construction alone in the 2024 budget is allocated about 550 billion, while the total budget of the Works Ministry is about 657 billion. You know, so indeed, why the allocation to the Housing Ministry or Housing and Urban Development Ministry is quite low and can't go far considering our housing needs. You know, taken together and fully implemented, the huge expenditure on capital projects may, and I use the word may very strongly, be able to create a fair measure of economic growth or economic activities across the country. You know, there is, however, I must say, a very good challenge because of the funding gap that we have. You recall I mentioned the issue of the deficit. We're going to have, apart from the fact that our revenue projection is quite optimistic, despite that optimism with regards to revenue projection, we still have to find 9.18 trillion to fund the budget. And that's the deficit part of the budget. So that's a challenge that must contend with. It's good to study where we are or to discuss where are we as a country right now with regards to housing, with regards to the real estate sector or the economy in general. Because I mean, like I said earlier on, the economy, the housing sector or the real estate sector plays a very vital role in the economic development of any country. And therefore, when that sector is doing well, the economy is doing well. So it's good to review where we are. You know, right now we have a huge housing deficit. Some people question the number, but between 15 and 23 million units, depending on who you're talking to. But the truth, whatever number you want to adopt, the key is that we lack adequate housing for 220 million Nigerians. I mean, that is not in doubt. Even if we have the numbers, we don't have them in the right quality. And I dare say that we neither have them in the right number on the right quality, and therefore it remains a problem. We have a huge infrastructural deficit. It's estimated at about $3 trillion. What it means is that if we are to invest to sort out our infrastructural needs, we expect to spend about $3 trillion, which I'm sure we all know that we don't have. I mean, the estimate really by the Integrated Master Plan Agency of the government is that it will require expenditure of about 150 billion annually over a 20-year period to address the deficit. You know, interest rates are high, the bank lending rates are high, well over 25%. Inflation right now is in the region of about 28%, which is again very high. Of course, we've seen what is happening in the FX market with regards to the valuation of the naira. Yeah, at some point, it's about 1,400 naira to a dollar in the black market. We also have high costs arising from the removal of fuel subsidy. This is very, very pronounced, and I'm sure we feel it in the transport sector, we feel it in the construction sector. In fact, in the construction sector, where we know that we have to rely on a lot of artisans to come to work and go back home. The removal of subsidies has actually contributed a lot to the high cost of construction. And that is not abating, because we know and we were told that price of fuel may yet go up. But even as it is now, it is already a big problem with regards to that subsidy removal. Of course, again, we have very poor mortgage penetration. I mean, if you check the number of people who actually have mortgages, so-called mortgages in this country, is a very, very, very low number. And that is a big problem, because the truth is that the sector cannot develop without appropriate mortgage. It is difficult to develop the housing sector without a strong mortgage sector. And right now, our mortgage penetration is very, very low. We also have a very high poverty rate. The last data says that about 133 million Nigerians are in multi-dimensional poverty. What it means is that 133 million Nigerians are in extreme poverty. Some people call us the poverty capital of the world. And I dare say that, I mean, with that poverty rate, no matter how liberal the mortgage terms may be, it is difficult for a lot of Nigerians to qualify, no matter how liberal that, because I mean, if the take-home pay or the minimum pay monthly salary is about 35,000 naira, which some states cannot even pay right now, how many people can indeed afford a mortgage, no matter how liberal? Very, very few. Of course, we have reliance on imported building materials. A lot of the high-end buildings, a lot of the building materials we use for the sector are imported, which is a problem, because, like I said, the FX rate is already very high. We also have a reliance on traditional building methods. The brick and mortar method of construction, even though it suits our environment, it's a very expensive method. It's not only expensive, it's also time consuming, and this contributes to the problem in the housing sector in terms of how soon we can deliver housing and at what cost. We also have land tenure constraints. One of those issues is a non-review of the Land Use Act since 1978 when it was promulgated. There have been a clamor for its review since 1978, but to date that has not been done due to lack of the will to do so, lack of the political will, and issues that are fear or fear-mongering, as I may say, because indeed there is hardly electoral laws. A lot of laws in this country are being reviewed yearly or regularly, but this one since 1978 has not been reviewed, and that is a problem. I mean, so if you look at the issues of the consent provisions of that act, or the process of obtaining certificate of occupancy, or the compensation provisions, these are provisions that experts have been clamoring should be reviewed. If we recall, the Land Use Act was a product of a minority report, but then it's been there since 1978 without review, and experts have clamored for a review. A scenario where the land transfer charges for properties that the government knows that you belong to you. So you own a property in GRA and you're selling it to Mr. B. The land transfer charges in form of consent fees is just too high, and it makes transactions in real estate rather too expensive. Costs so much, takes so much time, and it's a problem. There's also the issue of poor capital in the housing sector. There's also, again, a lot of these people now have to be brought in from outside Nigeria, and that is just not good, because ordinarily these are people. The real estate sector is a huge employer of labor, and a scenario where we don't have the right number of people locally here to do this kind of work is a problem, because by bringing them in from Cotonou or from Ghana or from elsewhere, it means that we actually, no matter how you put it, giving employment to those areas. Meanwhile, our own people, those people who should be doing such works, rather than, because they don't have the adequate or appropriate training for them, are doing some other things like riding Okada and the like, and therefore it needs to be addressed. There are also legal and regulatory issues. One key one are the tenancy laws. Of course, and I must say it's also a global issue, really, because the law tends to favor the tenants more. And when it comes to mortgages, the law tends to favor the borrower, because it takes time for the bank to recover the money they lend to somebody. So the issue of the tenancy law and the power of possession laws are a problem. Why are they a problem? Because it's an impediment to investment in the sector. If people know that when a tenant defaults in rent, they can't recover the property for years, then it's an impediment. And as a practitioner, I see it happen every day. There are those who don't invest in rental housing. And the challenge is that because this affects the low income and medium income areas more, nobody really wants to invest in those areas. If they want to invest in the high-end areas where they can deal with the problem. So these laws needs to be dealt with. There's also a very poor enabling environment for the private sector to be the engine of growth. As you see earlier in this paper, the challenge of the government is trying to do things directly, trying to do the construction. But then it's easier to create an enabling environment where the private sector can do the construction and in a more efficient way. There is no doubt that the efficiency and effectiveness can be driven better by the private sector. Despite all promises by the last administration, only about 5,000 completed housing units were delivered in 8 years. Note the number. So many were commenced, thousands were commenced, but only about 5,000 units were delivered by the last administration. Again, it goes to emphasize what I've been saying, that the private sector can do these things far more efficiently at lower cost and within a better time frame. Considering our huge funding constraints, it is clear that the government alone cannot meet our housing needs, housing and infrastructural needs. It's not possible. Government alone cannot do it. And I will say that it's actually better for the government to deal with the constraints and problems affecting the sector and allow the private sector to be the engine of growth. It is difficult. I don't know how else to emphasize this, but I mean, we all know the challenges of procurement in our public sector. It is fraught with all manner of corruption, all manner of bottlenecks. And therefore, there are those things that the government really shouldn't try doing directly. I dare say that part of them are housing, at least if it is the issue of social housing, yes, the government can come in because it's social. But let's address the one the market can take. The private sector is able to do these things more efficiently than the government can do if they have the right environment to do so. And that's what the government needs to deal with. I'd like to now review the priorities that were made by Federal Ministry of Housing and Urban Development. I had earlier on listed to you or provided to you their core projects, which includes construction of 20,000 housing units and slum clearance and prioritizing building material production in some states. I think a lot needs to be done by the ministry with regards to dealing with the issue of regulation, with regard to the issue of creating that enabling environment I talked about. So I would say that more emphasis should be paid rather than engaging in direct construction, which they've been doing, which is why I'm sure if we go across this country, there are thousands of abandoned projects, housing projects all over the place that haven't been finished, more often than not started by the government. I think that having reviewed their priorities for this year, more emphasis, because I mean, the truth is that the budget cannot provide enough funds for them to build houses for everybody. It's not possible. And therefore, more emphasis should be paid by the ministry in jumpstarting the local manufacturing of building materials to save us effects, to bring the cost of construction down, and to benefit, to create employment. It will do so much if that is done. In this regard, there should be a strong plan to revitalize the Nigerian Building and Road Research Institute. I'm aware the central bank gives all manner of intervention funds for agriculture, the aviation sector, and all agencies. The Building Research Institute requires that kind of intervention for it to work, to research.
Please, we apologize for, I think, the break in transmission. Sorry, trying to resolve a bit of technical glitch, and we'll be back shortly. Sorry. Once again, we apologize. We're trying to sort out this technical glitch. We'll be back with you shortly. We apologize, please.
Or centers for local.
Hello, sir. Are you? Hello, sir. We apologize once again to our audience. This is a technical issue which we're trying to resolve, and in a couple of minutes we're going to sort this out. And please get back online. Please, we apologize, and we please ask for your patience. Thank you.
Okay, Sonja, thank you very much. I think we are back on the line.
Okay, great. All right.
The other issue I need to address with regards to my review of the priorities of the Federal Ministry of Housing and Urban Development has to do with the issue of deepening mortgage penetration. And one way to do it, I've always said that, look, the government must lead by example. If we are talking of mortgages, I keep wondering why the government is not doing much to even give mortgages to its own public servants that work under the government. I recall being part of a group that tried to do housing in one of the states of the Federation. And what we did say was that we'll do the housing, we'll do maybe start with 100 units. And we are telling the government, because of where this thing is located, let the government commit to buy 60%, not necessarily to buy, but to provide mortgages for their staff to buy. But the state government wouldn't do it. So the challenge is that one way to deepen mortgage penetration is let the government, the government has employees that they pay salaries every month who are interested in owning homes naturally. So one way to deepen it is even the government to lead by example and find a way to grant mortgages to their own staff. If you recall that we have the National Housing Fund, and if you ask how many people have benefited because of the protocol and procedures, a lot has not been achieved in that area. So there's a need for a concerted effort to deepen the mortgage penetration. And one way to experience this is for the government, like I said, to play a role in even funding, granting mortgages to their own staff as a way of jumpstarting that sector. So much has been said about what can be done to lower the mortgage rates in this country, whether from the use of dormant accounts or unclaimed dividends. Again, this calls for further discussion, but the truth remains that the housing sector cannot develop without appropriate mortgages. There is nowhere in the world where that sector has developed without mortgages. The idea of paying cows, whether for 10 or 20 million or 100 million to drop cash on the table, it cannot just work, cannot progress the sector, and therefore a lot needs to be done to deepen the mortgage penetration. The other issues have to do with the review to work for the ministry rather than trying to construct houses directly. The ministry should rather work with the states to review the tenancy laws and power repossession laws, which I mentioned earlier on. These will encourage investments in the sector. I talked about the fact that some people don't actually want to invest in rental housing, and the areas mostly affected are those low-income areas where a lot more houses are needed. But if tenants can keep you in court for 5-6 years, then people just don't want to invest there. So there's a need to review those laws to make it more friendly to investors to partake, to get into that sector, that area of investment. Again, there's also a need to review the land use act. I've talked about the importance of that review with regards to some of the provisions, whether the content provisions or the process of obtaining certificate of occupancy. There is a need for a review of the Land Use Act. It's been there since 1978, and it's time to review the salient aspects of that law. The Yar'Adua government tried to do so. Unfortunately, he couldn't complete it before, he couldn't get far before he passed on. But there's a need for a concerted effort to review the Land Use Act. I believe that it's appropriate for the ministry to pay more attention to these areas. And to finally also pay attention to a robust land reform process that will provide Nigerians title to their land. I'm aware that there was a National Technical Committee on Land Reform, again under the Yar'Adua and Jonathan governments. How far have they gone? How many states have gone through the process? How many states can you get to now and get title to your land within a record time? I doubt whether there's any, but so much needs to be done. And these are the kind of areas that the Ministry of Housing and Urban Development can champion as against direct construction of houses, which of course they don't have I wouldn't say competence. Like I've talked about the procurement challenge of the government, which is the problem. It's fraught with all manner of can the projection hold? It's good to know whether the projection can hold. If it does hold, then we'll make a lot of progress. The next one is appropriate fiscal and monetary policies. establish fiscal and monetary policies that will improve our sovereign rating to make it easier for FDIs to come into the country. The second one is a diligent implementation of the budget as signed by the president with regards to execution of the budgeted infrastructure works. I said earlier on that a budget of our 1.32 trillion is for infrastructure alone across like 4 or 5 ministries. If that money is judiciously spent, it may have an impact on economic activities in the country. It really should. Again, the second one is the generation of a robust economic growth that will reduce the poverty rate in the country and put more people within the bracket that can qualify for mortgages. I said earlier on that it is difficult for people to qualify right now, no matter how liberal it is. Only very few Nigerians are able to qualify for mortgages because the poverty rate is just too high. So a lot more needs to be done to improve that. Another driver is the government plan to fund infrastructure through private capital. I know the president said this, and the Minister of Finance and Economic Planning equally said so, that there's a plan to fund infrastructure through private capital. That's commendable because, like I said, if the environment is right, there is so much that can be done by the private sector in terms of funding not just housing development, but also infrastructural development. Another driver to note, of course, is the president's campaign promise to merge various agencies in the housing sector to create one big entity, that can become. The president felt that because there are multiple agencies working in the sector, that if and when they are merged to create one big entity, that it may just serve the country better. And therefore, the hope is that this will be done very soon, that agency will be created very soon, and that it will work as the president intends to and become more effective. I honestly still don't know how it will work because a bigger entity means that it is bigger. It may just have the kind of bottlenecks associated with government that will make it difficult to achieve the growth prospects projections that we have in mind. But then we haven't got details of what the president has in mind. The body has not been set up, and we can only wait to analyze it when it does set up the body. There's also the issue of the government's ability to, one other driver to watch is the government's ability to curb the high level of insecurity across the country, which will in turn aid the projected economic growth. The level of insecurity is just too high that growth is difficult in certain areas. A scenario where some parts of the country are just so insecure that investors cannot get there is not good. And therefore, there has to be a concerted effort by the government to address this. That's a major driver that will tell us where we're going, whether we can achieve a 3.88% growth. Because a 3.88% growth has to come from activities across the whole country. And therefore, if some parts of the country are unable to develop because of insecurity, that won't help at all. Again, it's the issue of the global oil price stability and our ability to produce 1.78 million barrels a day. To achieve this, of course, we know we require peace in the Niger Delta area to be able to pump the oil to get to this point. I've always felt that this is a low-hanging fruit. We already have the oil, and all we need to do is create the environment for us to explore and pump the oil, since we already have it anyway. So for me, it's a low-hanging fruit, and the government must do, as a driver, the government must do all it can to ensure that we meet this target. Again, how the government is able to raise money to fund the projected deficit is also a driver to watch. How will the government achieve that? We recall the government already said that they wouldn't use ways and means, and I support that. That's the right decision to do. So if the government is no longer going to use ways and means, it means that we have an issue of how the government will raise the 9.1 trillion deficit that will be required to fund that deficit. What is the reality on ground? I talked about where we are earlier. Then I want to talk about the reality. What is the effect of the budget on our housing shortage or the deficit? What effect will the budget have on our housing deficit? Will the budget lead to the construction of enough houses to solve our enormous housing problems? Certainly not. In fact, I would say the priorities in this budget cycle You will notice that real estate was not part of it. You know, and for obvious reasons, because we do have a lot of problems, and real estate right now is not part of those core priorities for very obvious reasons. I will say that even if all available allocations for the sector is invested in housing construction alone, it will still just amount to a drop in the ocean due to our huge housing deficit. And therefore, something else needs to be done. Something else needs to, we have to look at this problem from a different perspective. Since the government alone cannot directly fund and provide the housing required by all Nigerians. What is the effect of the budget on real estate values? I'm sure a lot of us are listening to hear this. Which direction is it going to go? Are values going to go up or down as a result of the budget? My take is that with a diligent implementation of the budget, will have a positive impact on real estate values. I believe it will. That if the budget is implemented diligently and positively, it will definitely have a very positive effect on values. Already we are seeing values nudging up across the country, especially in big cities like Lagos and Abuja. You know, you could check values last year and values now in several parts of Lagos or Abuja, or even in Enugu or Ibadan. You will see that there has been an upward movement. Why is this so? Or why do I expect this to continue during this budget cycle? One is that the expected economic growth will put more investable funds in the hands of people. If indeed we grow at 3.8%, it means that we're going to have more people with more investable funds to invest, and therefore that is one driver to watch. That if we do grow at the rate expected, there will be more investment funds for people to invest. Again, real estate remains a better hedge against inflation and foreign exchange risks. I mean, it's not a perfect hedge, as the case may be, but it remains a better hedge. I mean, no matter how bad the Naira is battered, people still feel better holding real estate than holding a lot of other investment options like shares and all that. You know, so even for inflation running at 20%, somehow real estate amounts a better hedge. Like I said, it's not a perfect hedge. It never can be, but it's a better hedge against inflation and foreign exchange risks. It also remains the asset class of choice, not just here, but globally. Across the world, people prefer to hold real estate than most other assets. You know, on record, it is noted that in the Western world, in the United States, for example, the easiest way for somebody to raise money is a mortgage on his own property. You know, and therefore, is the equity on your mortgage is the easiest way for you to raise funding for a project in the United States or Europe. And therefore, we must know that it's the asset class of choice globally. A home ownership is a key asset that when people acquire, apart from socioeconomic stability, it also gives the comfort that when you're pressed, hard pressed, as I've just mentioned, it's an easier way to use to locally here for those who raise money through the banks. It's also a simpler and much more understood investment option. You know, I mean simpler and much more understood because real estate is common. I mean, I'm sure the average person is a real estate expert. He will tell you what he can build here and there to make money or what nature of the development he should do. So it's much more understood than a lot of other investment options. There are also fewer investment options locally. I mean, if you check it, apart from buying shares or investing in government bonds and all that, there are very few options. The industrial sector is not doing well, you know, and the derivatives that exist outside the country in the developed world are not here. And therefore, you're actually just left with either investing in shares or buying government bonds or the like. And therefore, there are quite few of them, which is why real estate remains a preferred option. Finally, at a time when movement of funds locally and internationally is becoming more and more difficult, fund movement is becoming more and more difficult. Real estate tends to be a better absorbent of such funds. You can see that if you're looking at my screen, I use the word absorbent in inverted commas, open and close, for very obvious reasons, so that I don't want to be quoted on this, but it's a real fact that because of difficulty moving funds in and out of the country globally, you know, real estate across the world tends to be a better absorbent of such funds when you can move them around. and the same applies to our country. In conclusion, as I conclude, I've talked about the need for government to pay more attention to the issue of regulatory and legal issues in the sector as a way of creating, as well as creating an enabling environment for the private sector to operate. It's absolutely important that we come to terms with the fact that government alone cannot provide the housing required by the average Nigerian. Not only that, the government can provide it in the efficient and timely way that is required. And therefore, rather than start projects that can be finished, or commence projects where cost overrun makes the projects, or make the project inconclusive or necessarily too expensive, why can't the government just create the environment for the private sector to act? The private sector is able to meet the supply side, while the government should concentrate on stimulating demand through striving for a robust economic growth and deepening of the mortgage penetration in the economy. What do I mean by this? I mean, the private sector can deal with the demand side of the supply side by constructing the houses if they have the enabling environment. I mean, it's a business, and people go into business to generate profit. And therefore, if the environment is right in terms of regulatory issues, in terms of when you apply for approval, you get it on time, you don't get harassed by the average taxman on the road or chasing you up at police or the police or the taxman for all manner of taxes. Just create the right environment and let the government play its role in terms of regulation. I feel that if that is done, the private sector can deal with the supply end, while the government, like I said, can deal with the demand. And the government can deal with the demand just by stimulating that demand through economic growth and deepening of the mortgage. I talked about the government even leading by example. The least they can do is even offer a mortgage to their own staff to buy homes. By so doing, by creating a robust economic growth and deepening the mortgage sector, the housing sector can develop. And like I've said earlier on, when the sector is doing well, the overall economy is doing well. This is a global trend. And that's why in the developed world, special attention is paid to the mortgage sector and the housing sector. And I think the same should happen in our country. You know, when the economy grows and everybody can feel the economic growth, it helps. Like I talked about the growth projection of 3.88%. Even if we achieve between the 3% projected by the World Bank or the 3.88 projected by the government, it's still a lot. If we keep moving in that trend, in the end, things will become easier. You know, the challenge with the system is that right now in places like Lagos and Abuja, we have grade A offices mostly empty. The luxury apartments do not have the right tenants or do not have enough tenants. Why? Because the economic growth is at a very low level. I mean, it's only when the economy is growing at an appreciable level that the companies that can take the grade A office will come in to take them. It's only then that the mostly expatriates who live in luxury apartments can come in to take the luxury apartments. So everything dovetails to economic growth and the need for the government to generate robust economic growth and that can put more money in the hands of Nigerians. As the saying goes, a rising tide lifts all boats. A rising tide, when the economy is doing well, it affects everybody, and that's what the government should aim for. And like I said earlier, as I close, pay more attention to regulatory and legal issues in the sector, create the right environment for the private sector to operate. That will help jumpstart our houses and real estate sector, and I think that's the way to go. Thank you very much.
Thank you so very much, Mr. Elliott. Thank you so very much for doing justice to that topic, and indeed a very interesting one, reeling out all the parameters and the key indicators for the budget. Once again, let me apologize to our listener for the little glitch that we had in the course of the presentation. At some point, we had a little glitch, but we know these are technical issues that most times we may not be able to do. I mean, it just happens, you know, so we want to apologize for that. But the bottom line is that we thank you so much, Mr. Elliott, and our listeners for listening to this topic. Already we have about three in one question, the another question, and two other participants who would be willing to ask direct question. So I'm going to ask Angela or Muji to please the name Fari, and there's another name over there. Yes, about 2 of them. Please just, leave them up to panelists. At some point, I'm going to call them to make their submissions. So listening to you honestly, listening to all these figures, I must say, particularly when we look at, is there hope with this budget? When you started, you talked about the fact that this figure looks huge and big, but in terms of when you look at the impact of the FS or the value of the naira, is it really big in terms of, is the budget really big? These are questions that we should be asking ourselves. You also talked about, you dwell so much more, and you made emphasis on the issue of mortgage and housing. We'll keep talking about Israel. We can never stop talking about them. Now, before I go to these people asking this question, I'm going to ask you quickly, because we've looked at the budget, we've looked at the figures, there are certain things you said, in terms of the real estate, it's not a primary project for this administration. From this budget that we've seen, it's obvious that real estate is not a priority, for the administration. And so we've talked about the real estate values as it goes up. So the question I want to ask, one question before I go to this, is that as practitioners, then also as investors in real estate, having listened to this breakdown of this budget, would you say, you come in, this is an honest question, and maybe that would demand a direct approach, because we advise investors. Would you say this budget, you've talked about if it is well implemented, maybe there are certain measures, but by and large, looking at it holistically, would you say this budget is something to write about in terms of real estate for the practitioners and also for the would-be investor?
Sonia, thank you very much. I had talked about it earlier on. I did mention that even though if you look at the allocation to the Ministry of Housing and Urban Development, it doesn't give a lot of hope. At 99 billion, considering where we are, it's a very tiny drop in the ocean. I even did say that even if you lump the entire allocation for the Works Ministry, for the Housing Ministry, and some other ministries together, it still won't go far in addressing our housing issues. But we must look at housing from a macroeconomic point of view, and look at the effect of the budget, the projected or expected effect of the entire budget on the economy, which is why I refer to the capital budget of nearly 11 trillion when you take it together, and the proposed investment of 1.32 trillion on infrastructure alone across several ministries. If that is all done judiciously and diligently, I feel that it may, and I use that word may very strongly, it may just generate enough economic activities to get the country going. So by and large, I'm not saying that the allocation to the Ministry of Housing can do more. It cannot do more, which is why I actually feel, and I believe strongly, that the government must stop the construction. They must do less of the construction and play more regulatory roles in the sector to create the necessary environment for the private sector to operate. I'm sure I've addressed your question a little bit.
Yes, you have. Thank you very much, sir. I will still go back to one question much more later, but if we have the time. And so let's quickly listen to, there are 2 persons who've been promoted. I'm going to take, there's a question, we have about 3 questions already at the question and answer from, we're going to look at it. Can we have the name? I'm sorry if I get the pronunciation right. Fari, is it Fari or Fari? Can you please unmute yourself and please make your contribution? Fari, are you ready for us? If you're ready for us, unmute yourself and make your contribution or comments or questions. Are you there? If not, can we have Obiali, yes, Chukwebuka, please. Can you unmute yourself? Chukwebuka, please, can you unmute yourself and gladly make your comment, question, or contribution whilst we wait for. Hello, Mr. Chukwebuka Obiali. Can you unmute yourself? Okay, if he's not doing that, can we have Mr. Gabriel Owokwe, please unmute yourself and please can you, yes, Mr. Gabriel.
Thank you very much, my friend Emeka, for this very beautiful and insightful presentation. I would say I don't expect anything less. Having said that, I just have is a question and also a suggestion, especially to the institute that you have had the privilege of heading this country, that is the Institute of Surveyors, General Institute of Surveyors and Estate Valuers. Can't that institute, your institute, be able to put some level of pressure on the current government under a PPP arrangement to complete all the abandoned housing projects all across the nation, arranging through your institute, arranging for private sector drivers who can be able to complete these projects, and the government now coming out on their part to at least initiate and bring forth soft mortgage finance facilities that will go to the civil servants as well as some other institutions can take. I see this as a low-hanging fruit that can easily be achieved in the year 2024. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Gabriel. We're glad. So you can just note that question. Let's take one more person so that you address I think there's one, Mr. Paul. Angela or Moji, please, can you bring Mr. Paul up into as the panelist too? I can see one Mr. Paul. If he's still there, can he just unmute himself and probably make his comment or question? Is it there? Okay. If not, sir, please, can you just attend to the question so that we can now go to the Q&A?
Okay. Thank you so much, Mr. Wobe. Nice to hear. Nice that you joined in. And let me say that your question is very apt with regards to the role the Nigerian Institution of Estate Surveyors and Valuers, the role that the institution can play with regards to abandoned projects. You know, the challenge we have in Nigeria is not necessarily lack of advice. It's not necessarily that when you get to work with the government, you will see that virtually any topic that is raised, whether any issue that is raised, have been discussed by panels upon panel. If you join a government panel and they give you documents pertaining to previous panels on the same topic, the first question you will ask yourself is that if you haven't implemented the earlier panel reports, why did you establish another panel to look at this issue? So it's not so much that the government doesn't know what to do. I mean, I'm aware there have been audit of abandoned projects across the country. But the issue is that when these projects are being held on to as in a way that they don't want to release them, because like I said, is a critical aspect of every ministry to award contracts. And therefore, I tend to feel that it's not what the government wants to do away with. If you recall that at some point when they were trying to promulgate the Bureau of Public Procurement Act, the idea really was to create another agency that would do the award of contracts. But that is still not done because it doesn't suit the government. If you don't get to see governments in the United States or England after FEC meeting, they tell you contracts are awarded. But that's a common thing here because the government likes to handle the award of contracts for very obvious reasons. You know, so as good as what you've said is not, like I said, there have been reports on abandoned projects. I'm even aware that some of my colleagues were involved in it. But can the government release these projects for completion? It's all part of what I'm saying, that until we change our mindset and the government decides to do away with direct involvement in what the government shouldn't be doing, then we'll keep having this problem. The reason why those projects keep getting abandoned, I read where the Umahi, the Minister of Works, addressing the National Assembly, I think he did say that the reason why road projects are abandoned is that you budget a road project of 5 billion. Every year you allocate 200 million or 500 million to it. It means you're already creating an avenue for the road to be abandoned because you know the project cost is about 5 billion, but the entire allocation for a year may be 200 million or 500 million. That is a problem. So the point I'm making is that I agree with you completely that something needs to be done. Whether the government will release the project is a different matter altogether. I'm sure that submission has been done severally, that hand over these abandoned projects to the private sector through a PPP arrangement, like you rightly said. But, you know, we have too many challenges with PPP because you get into one, another government comes and takes you out and you suffer losses. So it's a big problem. But I do agree with you that something needs to be done The government, we need to find another way of dealing with the abandoned projects across the country. The government has to work harder to deepen mortgage penetration, and I've made it easier for them. I mean, one in my brief stint in banking, we are told that character is key to giving loans, and so the easiest people for you to give loans to are your employees. So I keep wondering why the government cannot just grant mortgages to its own staff, for instance, to own a home, because the staff are already in the government register. The government knows who they are. So that's a low-hanging fruit, as you said. So I agree with you. Something needs to be done. Of course, we must not get tired of reaching out to the government. And I've heard you very well. I'll convey it again to my institution that maybe it's a process we should restart again, because we must never get tired of talking to the government to do the right thing. Thank you once again, Gabe. I appreciate your question.
Okay, thank you very much, sir. Tokpa, please, can you promote the other two? I have before we yes, Olamiliko, hold your thought for a while. And DB, just be there and just get ready. At some point, I'm going to call you. So let's look at a few questions that we have in the chat box. There are a few questions I'm going to take maybe 2 or 3 of them. Then we'll go back to the comments from those who were promoted to the panelists. Somebody, the international facility, I think management or so, raised this question. Okay, sorry, Tunde Ayeye raised the question. So what advocacy can be engaged on wasting government assets at federal and state levels that can be low-hanging fruits? For example, Ikoyi Federal Secretariat and such materials across the country. What is the effort needed to improve maintenance? Look at the state of Festac and other low to medium housing estates. I don't know if you get this. Do you want to take this?
Yes, I do. To the thanks for the question. Again, you call it a low-hanging fruit, and indeed it's a low-hanging fruit because I'm always amazed as to why the government won't maintain its own assets. Why you build an asset and you can't just maintain it properly. The challenge is that I've often joked that government must be run the way we run our families, the way we run our homes, because no father will see the roof of his house leaking and won't fix it immediately, because if he doesn't fix it immediately, the water will, when the rain falls, the rain will beat the children. But here we'll see a government asset lying fallow or being run down, and nothing is done until it gets very, very, very bad. Then we start setting up panels. So it's a challenge. So I agree that with regards to government assets, the proper thing to do is to have them properly managed by those who are qualified to manage them. From basic surveyors and valuers to facility managers, to those who have the competence to manage them. I mean, that's the reason why private sector, if you go to Victoria Garden City, for instance, you cannot compare Victoria Garden City to Festac. You cannot compare a privately run estate to a government one. You cannot get into a government building. It's in a government building that the lifts won't work properly or the toilets won't be cleaned regularly. And it's not rocket science with regards to what to do. The challenge of government is to appoint the right people to do it, rather than again trying to do it themselves or appointing cronies and the like to do them. So today I will say that I agree it's a low-hanging fruit, and the major thing the government needs to do is to appoint appropriate people to do tasks that are appropriate in the public sector. If you check everything happening in that sector, from building collapse to lack of proper management of government assets to the fact that projects are abandoned across the country, it all born out of wrong advice or wrong personnel acting for the government. When the proper people are involved, things will work. When the proper people are involved and the government gives them the free hand to do what they're meant to do, those assets will lie fallow. You mentioned the Federal Secretariat, which has been lying. We're talking of lack of housing. And Federal Secretariat has been lying fallow. If you hear the full story of Federal Secretariat, you weep for the country, because it was bought by somebody. If left alone, that building would have been converted to the flat. People actually paid for them. People paid for the flats. Some mortgage banks actually bought blocks at Federal Secretariat. But due to government issues of approval or non-approval, it is still lying fallow till date. How many years after? I mean, by keeping it lying fallow, the cost of doing that work, I'm sure, would have risen by over 501 million%. Why? Because of bottlenecks that are very unnecessary. And that is why when you talk of government assets and PPP, people also shy away, because by and large, if you hold the wrong side of the stick, you can get burnt, as happened to the investor and federal secretariat. So it is a problem. Government needs to just straighten its act very well, address all the legal and regulatory issues that are constraints to investments in not just real estate sector, but across the board in all sectors, for things to move smoothly. When we talk of structure of the government, when we talk of the fact that part of our problem is that our government is not well structured, beyond the government is its agencies equally that needs to loosen up and allow the proper things to be done in those sectors for things to work properly.
All right, thank you very much, sir. Thank you. Okay, let's take one more question from the chat box. Paul Ojenalmo is asking, he says, the cost of projects in Nigeria, particularly infrastructure, is abnormally high, above global average. What should the government do about this? Is it a carryover of corruption in the other facets that we must keep up with? Did you get that, sir?
Yes, I did. Of course, I mean, he talked about corruption and the fact that the procurement costs are high. It's because when the procurement system is wrong, then the end product will be high costs. You know, why are government projects far more expensive than private sector projects? It boils down to corruption. It boils down to a shady procurement process that is not competitive, it's not efficient, and it's not reliable in terms of delivering a project at a low cost and at a required quality. So in the government, we are dealing with one, high cost, we are dealing with low quality, you know, because even when the government pays the high cost for the projects, in the end, they don't deliver the right quality, which is why you see that I'm emphasizing that those projects that the government have no business in, the government need not get into them at all. So, Paul, I do agree that indeed this saying is true, that road construction, for instance, across the world, why are roads per square meter in Lagos or Abuja or Bayelsa, why are they, despite our terrain, more expensive than any other part of the world? The reason is just corruption, you know, which is why a proper procurement system, the Bureau of Public Procurement will want to solve that problem, but of course it hasn't done so, you know, because if we have a proper procurement system, then of course the project will become competitively priced. And when you have a transparent and competitive bidding process, then it throws up the best person at the best price. The issue is the government willing to go that route? If they do, of course the cost will come down.
Okay, thank you very much, sir. Okay, let's take another question from Bashir Adamu. Bashir Adamu is asking you, sir, what are your thoughts on how to deepen and enhance the Nigerian mortgage market? That's the first question. And the second question is, I joined in rather late. I wonder if it's okay if the prospect of the states and local governments were considered in this discussion and analysis rather than the FG allocation to the sector. I mean, sir, can you take that?
Yes, thank you so much, Bashiri. Effectively, what we address is the national budget, you know, not the states. It's difficult to deal with all the states of the federation. That would be a separate forum, but we dealt with the national budget. You know, I'm aware I've gone through a couple of state budgets that are quite commendable, because, like, I'm aware the reason you are asking this is that the economic activities generated across all the states will help develop the country, will get us to where we're going to. So it's important to know how the states are doing. I'm aware that in a state like Enugu State, for instance, the capital budget, the budget for Enugu State, capital expenditure is as high as 60%. Again, very commendable. So some states are actually keyed into it. The fact that you need to spend more on infrastructure, on capital projects to develop your state. I mean, like I said, the national budget, capital budget alone is 35%, which is commendable. So we'll be dealt with the national budget with regards to our appropriation bill that was signed by the president on on January 1, 2024. You talked about mortgages, what can be done. You know, the housing sector survives on a tripod. You have the land, you have the mortgages, and then you have the building costs or construction costs. You know, a major part of it is the mortgage. How do we create an enabling environment where mortgages can be given at a rate that is affordable? You know, if you talk to our friends in Europe or America, when mortgage rates rose to 7%, they were screaming. 8%, they were screaming because they are used to 2-3%. And each time I hear them, I just laugh because back here is a lot higher. And like I've said earlier on, not much can be done without a deeper mortgage penetration that can enable people to obtain mortgages. So one way to do so, it must be a government intervention plan to help the sector. I mean, I've often referred to the central bank intervention funds in so many areas, from agriculture to aviation. And I think the mortgage sector needs that kind of intervention. You know, is an issue that has to be dealt with holistically. Because if you reduce the cost of construction, then the mortgage the person is seeking will be a lot lower. The challenge now is that because costs are so high, a lot of the materials are imported. In the end, the average home, no matter, I saw a report somewhere, that no matter how you manage the cost of the tiniest bungalow, you are spending about 7-8 million naira. If you tell a civil servant who earns how much to deposit 10%, 20%, you can't have the money. So the starting point, like I said, is to address the cost issues. Because when the cost is addressed, then the eventual mortgage that buyers are seeking, whether civil servants or traders or employees, will become a lot less. You know, to address the issue of the mortgage rate, I think that there must be a form of government effort to do so. And I talked about intervention fund. I mean, I recall that there have been papers presented with regards to government using either dormant accounts or claim dividend, not to dash people the money, but to use it to jumpstart the process that when you do ABC, you can get a mortgage at a cheap rate. Because to call it a mortgage, it must be at least 10, 15 years, 20, 25 years at a rate that is affordable. And I think it requires government intervention in terms of an intervention fund to bring down the rate. Beyond that, leaving it to the market may be difficult because we are very far. If you look at the bank lending rates, you see that it's difficult to rely on normal banking to fund mortgages. There must be a more concerted effort by the government to provide mortgages to people at affordable rates. And it will require a direct government intervention to achieve that.
Thank you once again, sir. Quickly, before we go to take the submission of DB, Kamal is asking, out of the topic, how can we edge against speculators who cause unnecessary high price in the cost of land? That's the first leg of his question. The other question is, it says, how can estate surveyors and valuers partner with native landowners to perfect titles for their land so they can get value for money in the case study of Lagos State? You want to take that, sir?
Well, let me start from the last one. Partnering with native people to get title for their land. I would rather take it from a very holistic point of view. You know, I talked about the government getting involved in a robust land reform agenda. Under the Yar'Adua and Jonathan government, there was a National Technical Committee on Land Reform. You know, it needs to be restarted. There's absolute need to give title to land. You know, it's amazing that cars have registration numbers. If you drive a Corona and go to the land registry, you can know who owns the Corona because it's registered at Lagos Land Registry, Abuja, wherever you reside. The car is registered once it has the registration number. But then how much is the car? But you have plots of land. Somebody may have acres of land, no title. And without title, you really can't do much. You know, so a man may have 10, 20, 30 hectares of land somewhere, but he cannot raise 20,000 naira to pay his children's school fees. Why? Because he doesn't have title. So beyond the institution partnering with the locals to do so, even when the institution or our members partner with the locals to get title for them, they still have to go through the government bottlenecks. The problem of dealing with the government to get a title given. So I think the government first needs to simplify that process. I mean, if you go abroad, as far as Rwanda, which is a much smaller country, I must say, I mean, change of ownership in land takes hours to achieve at a very low cost. But here, if you're buying land anywhere, both the cost of this from the survey to this to that is just exorbitant. Even the one that has a government register, it's already registered, but just to transfer from A to B is also a problem. So the government needs to be systematic about this and deal with the issue holistically, which is to say, look, invest in the land reform agenda that can enable people have access to title for their land. When you do so, when you have the title, then it's easier for you to raise money for your business. It's easier for you to borrow money using your land as a collateral. I mean, we're talking of economic growth. That's one way to jumpstart the economic growth. We're talking of taxes for the government. When that is done, government will equally earn more taxes because then government can charge tenement rates or land or ground rent on the land and earn some fee. Property taxation across the world is a very important source of income for local governments and states. But that is not the case here because the government doesn't even know the bulk of the land area. They don't know who owns what. Why? Because there's no title. The government can only have a register of those they've given title to. So while I agree with you that there's a need for title to be given to people, I'm not sure how partnering with people to do it because you will still go through the process. The idea is for the government to play the role it's meant to play, to address the issue via a land reform agenda. It is a much smaller country, but they've done very well in that area. Let's start. If we started the land reform agenda over 8 years ago, how far have we gone now? Not far at all. Let at least be increasing the level every year. That needs to be done, and the government needs to do that. With regards to speculators, there will always be speculators all over the place. Again, because of lack of title and all that. That's why because if the title exists, people can't cheat you out of what you own. You know, people buying and selling must continue. I mean, you call them speculators, you call them land grabbers or whatever. I mean, that happens when the title register or people do not have, if you check the communal fights over land ownership, it's because there have not been a proper land reform agenda that can determine who owns the land. If every land in Lagos is marked and you know who owns it, as is done in developed world, then there will be no issue of a land grabber going to grab what doesn't belong to him. Because apart from an agenda that determines who owns the land, there's also an appeal process that if you have issues with this, you have to go through a process to prove that it is your own. Unlike here, where every issue leads to a fight or a war between communities or between individuals. So, as they call them, is a big problem. But the bigger issue is that of titling, which the government must pay greater attention to. Sonja, I can't hear you.
Okay, sir. Can you hear me now, sir? Sorry, I was... Okay, great. So I said Ademoye James has 3 questions here, but for time, I think we'll just take one of his questions so that we can go back to the person who will be given the privilege to make submission so that we can wrap up. I'm going to take one of his questions, and the question is, he says, if there is no transparency, there will be pushback. FMHUD, that's Federal Ministry of Housing Development, receiving a total allocation of 99.98 billion, will not go far if there's no transparency in the spending. Is now asking, how can the private sector tap into this budget? How can the private sector tap into this budget? Did you get that question, Sir? That's the third question, one of his questions, and out of his 3 questions we're going to be taking.
Yes, I mean, I heard it. How can the private sector tap into the budget? Of a truth, I mean, a lot of the projects done by the ministry will be done, of course, through, there will be contractors that will build the houses for them. There will be suppliers that will supply the materials. There will be the artisans that will work there. There will be professionals that will work there. But the core issue is the procurement process that will lead to the construction of the houses. I mean, I've said earlier on that because of that corrupt procurement process, in the end, the cost of those houses become too high, or the projects are abandoned because of the cost overruns. So yes, the private sector can benefit. I mean, if you're a contractor and you get a government project to do, of course you're working and you're making a profit. But then if you also check, I read the report again of the works minister. Contractors in the Federal Ministry of Works are being owed over, at a point, it was over 11 trillion naira for projects supposedly done and not paid for. You know, the risk is that more often than not, my own take is that because they know that this project may be abandoned, a project that will cost 1 naira, they will be 2, 3 naira. And by and large, it is so padded that when they receive the first installment or second installment, they are good. Because it's difficult to believe that people are being owed over 11 trillion for work done, as the work minister said. I mean, so the challenge is that, yes, the private sector is involved in construction or supplying and the like with regard to the work being done by the ministry, but it is a procurement system that is being used by the ministry as a problem. Because in the end, it is not transparent, like somebody mentioned, it is not efficient, it doesn't throw up the best contractor, it doesn't give the ministry the best price. Whatever the ministry or the government sector can do for 10 naira, I assure you the private sector can do it for 5, 6 naira and turn out a better project.
Thank you, sir. I can see, okay, so I want to ask, there are 2 questions. Let me quickly just take them. I see Professor Fidelis wants to ask a question, and I can see that there's another question in the chat box. Out of the 3 questions, we'll take one because we still have one person who is going to make a comment. So Professor Fidelis is asking, he's saying, do you feel the budget has made enough provision to address the issues of infrastructure maintenance and management?
Thanks, Prof. Again, I mentioned that the government plans to spend about 1.32 trillion on infrastructure alone across the Works Ministry, Aviation Ministry, Water Resources, and the like. It's still a drop in the ocean. It can't do it. It's not possible, which is why I commended the government effort to use private capital to invest in infrastructure. I also did say that according to the Nigeria Integrated Master Plan Committee, that it would require nearly 3 trillion to meet our infrastructural deficit. It requires about $150 billion every year. We don't have that kind of money based on our revenue projections, which the budget details. And so it is difficult to see how this budget alone can address it. But then it's a substantial investment they're making. And that's why I said that there's a bit of an area of hope that even as bad as things are, a diligent expenditure of the 1.32 trillion, which they say they will invest in infrastructure, should have a bit of an positive impact if it is done diligently. You know, so I surmise that it is not possible for the budgeted sum to solve the problem. Is very, very far from it, based on the data that we have. You know, but a diligent expenditure of 1.32 trillion, or which they expect to spend in that sector, you know, or the capital budget, which is nearly 11 trillion, as I said earlier on, is substantial enough to make an impact if it is diligently utilized. Of course, in saying so, you must go back to the drivers I mentioned. What are the issues that we must look out to if this budget will be implemented? Already we have a deficit of about 9.1 trillion that must be funded. Already, I did say that the revenue projections are rather optimistic. You know, it means that we must watch the monetary policies of the government with regards to interest rates, with regards to FX rates, with regards to whether we will sell the 1.78 million barrels a day as projected, whether the oil price globally remains at the $77 which we projected. There are just too many things to look at to know whether, because if we fail, if those drivers don't work, if the indicators under those drivers do not come true, it means that even raising the money that we expect to fund the budget will have a problem. You know, so I agree, there's no way the budgeted sum can deal with the issues, but it's a first start based on where we're coming from.
Okay, thank you, sir. Johnson, is you referred to intervention in your submission. You talked about intervention, and you raised the fact, you talked about the fact that you're aware the CBN does a lot of intervention in so many angles, and you talked about how you think intervention from that end into the housing sector is going to make a lot of change. Johnson Kolawole is saying here, I think it's just a submission just to respond to what you mentioned in your presentation. He said, I'm sure of the CBN intervention fund, which the government allows the private sector to have the opportunity, but the interest rate increased. And even at that, there's a default in repayment. Do you want to respond? I mean, just is the comment he made. Do you want to say a few things to that, sir?
No, it's a comment, Sonjo. You know, what I have said is that there's a need, the same attention paid to agriculture. Of course, in man's hierarchy of needs, you have food and shelter and clothing and all that. So agriculture, of course, takes preeminence. So because a country must be able to feed itself. So I can understand the attention we're paying to agriculture, you know, but I think that a lot of attention should also be paid to real estate, because as a big employer of labor, the multiplier effect of investment in real estate is on infrastructural work. It's enormous. It gets many people off the streets, you know, and tends to affect so many people in terms of income. You know, if you look at the average construction site, I see the number of people working there, from the suppliers to the artisans, is enormous. So many families are being fed there. And so government should pay attention. So if it's in form of intervention funds, which is available to other sectors, including aviation, including Nollywood, I think the housing sector also deserves that kind of intervention to ensure that it is running optimally, because it's a good measure of development when the sector is doing well. I mentioned again the United States of America, where they keep tracking indicators in the housing sector, the real estate sector, because when the sector is doing well, the economy is doing well by and large. And I believe that the same will be here. You know, so much can be achieved. If people are able to get mortgages to buy a home, you know, the socioeconomic stability it provides for the country is enormous. It can't be quantified. You know, so much can be achieved through that effort. And the interventions, like again, I recommend, because if the system cannot fund itself, then the government must intervene somehow to help. The same way they're helping in very many other sectors. That's the point we're making.
Okay. All right. So let's, I know submissions like this, topic of this nature will definitely throw up a whole lot of questions. That's why it seems that we won't we've actually have to deal with more questions than even when you actually spoke. So let's just answer, I mean, take just one more submission. This is a question from the webinar chat from Ikpema Emmanuel, is saying the overwhelming demand for infrastructure of diverse purpose have created a need to involve the private sector financing, constructing and managing public infrastructure to check the flaws common in conventional procurement in building performance in Nigeria. He is now saying, how can government provide solution to the problem of public procurement system in the Nigerian building industry? You talked about procurement side. He's also asking further in terms of what can the government do to provide solution in the issue of public performances in the Nigerian building industry.
Okay, thank you, Sonjo. What the government needs to do is let the Procurement Act work. I mean, we have a Public Procurement Act that went through all manner of processes to get to it. And if you deal with procurement in a very transparent manner, then you will get the appropriate price and an appropriate cost. The challenge is that when a system is opaque, when a system is shaded, when a system is deliberately tailored to achieve an aim, then you can't get the right price. I mean, why would prices by Shell or ABC Limited or ABC Enterprise, why would they get lower cost for the same construction or for the same kind of job than the government? It's because they have a transparent procurement process. It's not rocket science. The challenge is that where the government and its agencies and its functionaries believe that award of contracts is a good way to trade favors or to make money, then it's difficult to have a transparent process. I did say earlier on that it's difficult to see Joe Biden or the Prime Minister of UK awarding contracts at cabinet meetings, which is very common here. It's not just at the federal, it's actually worse at the states and local governments. I know that one of the questions was asking what about the states and local governments? I mean, and I've often said that the corruption and the inappropriate actions in the states and local governments is actually far more than at the federal level. So when we are speaking, we're not just speaking of federal, it's across the country, and what we're saying is actually worse at the states and local government level, you know? So, and it's a deliberate act to keep the prices high, to favor themselves and those that they want to favor. Again, the key thing to do is to have a transparent procurement system that will make every bid competitive. By so doing, you will get the best contractor at the best price and who will deliver the project on time and within the quality required. It's achievable. It's just that we don't have the willpower to do so, but that is the right thing to do.
All right, sir. I feel like closing and wrapping this up, I mean, right now, because we've actually spent a lot of time. I don't want to use the word, but I think we've stressed it so much in acting so many. But I see a question from Professor Nubi, and I'm not sure I want to allow you go without, taking this, two questions. So you help us do that quickly. Sorry for stretching you so much. Professor Nubi is asking, what can we do to reduce the cost of infrastructure in the country? With fair cost, the budgeted 1 trillion naira can deliver much more. So he's asking, then maybe we should take the two questions together. So you take everything in all, so that I go on to wrap up. Then ESV Olashekuni is saying, I believe I should contribute to the discussion, particularly when considering the subject of the 2024 budget and its impact on the real estate sector. My inquiries revolve around understanding the potential implications for professionals in the real estate industry, specifically estate surveyors and baggers, in comparison to those individuals who may lack the necessary expertise and engage in hasty transactions. So please, let's allow you weigh on this so that we can go on and wrap up.
Well, thank you so much, Sonjo. Professor Nubi, thank you so much for joining in. And I like your question with regards to procurement costs, with regards to infrastructure. I agree with you that diligently spent, which is the word I use, if the 1.32 trillion is diligently spent as indicated or as they should, if the vote for capital projects, which by and large, according to the Minister for Budget and Planning, is actually about 11 trillion if you add statutory reserve allocation, if it is spent diligently and judiciously, it will go a long way. But then the question is, will it be spent diligently? I mean, going by our past history, that is very doubtful. The only way it can be achieved is through, like I said again, a transparent procurement system that can generate competitive bids to enable us to choose the right contractor at the right price at the right quality. It's achievable if you want to do so. Big conglomerates, the MTNs of this world, the Shells, the Chevron, they do so. They go through the same process and achieve lower rates. Individuals do so. If you are building a house, Prof, I'm sure you'll build at a lower rate and still achieve the right quality. If I'm building, I will do so. But the challenge is that when the government is doing so, because they don't follow that process, they end up getting higher costs. So I agree that the amount budgeted for infrastructure can go a long way if it's done properly. We're hoping that there will be a difference this year. With regards to the other question, I really didn't get it very well, but I do agree with you with regards to the role of professionals in the sector, whether estate surveyors and valuers like yourself and myself, or engineers or architects. Government must make use of appropriate professionals in all sectors to achieve their aim. You must put a round peg in a round hole. A scenario where professionals not qualify for certain jobs are given certain jobs is not appropriate. So that care must be taken to ensure that the right professionals are used. I've earlier referred to the issue of building collapse or a scenario where road projects are not properly done. If the right professionals are used, it shouldn't arise.
Wow, what a fine place to live in with that challenge to individuals and professionals on this platform, not just on this platform, to know that we have this trust on us to ensure that we do the right thing at the right time and do it well as such. So want to thank everyone for listening in, for tuning in, for joining us on this first series of our webinar for this year. Thank you so very much. Mr. Ele, thank you very much for that being justice to this topic. We talked about the 2024 budget and the real estate sectors, the implications. We've looked at the figures, we've looked at what we should do, I mean, the challenges, where we are, what can be done better, and it's been a wonderful time. The questions, the comments, and the contributions, well, I mean, enlightening and very mind-opening, you know. So we want to thank you all for joining us, and we want to believe that subsequently, I mean, we'll be on this page, listen to us. February is another time for us to have another webinar. You'll be hearing from us in terms of the topic that we'll be speaking on, and we trust that you're going to be joining us. Mr. Ele, thank you so much for being on this platform, for sharing your thoughts with us. We do appreciate you greatly, and we look forward to having you at some other time. We'll always come back and call you to come and speak to us on topics of this nature, so that we can all do well in line of our profession. Once again, thank you all for coming, and thank you for, I can see another question, but we can't take anything right now. Our time is fast spent. We appreciate your patience, and we appreciate, for those of you who want the slide, please do well to send in your email address. We'll ensure that all the slides, you get the slide of the presenter to you so that you can look at them. And if there are other questions, please feel free to send them to our email addresses, and we'll respond to them appropriately. Once again, thank you for coming, and we pray that you have a productive day ahead, and this webinar put to an end right now. Thank you very much.